The Surron is a rather new type of electric bike that falls in between the gray area of a mountain bike and a dirt bike. I got my Surron a little bit over 2 years ago at this point, putting on over 6,000 miles. In that time, I've explored almost every trail and side street within a 10-mile radius of my house, met lots of awesome people, and have become a decent rider if I say so myself. Throughout that time, the popularity of Surrons has absolutely skyrocketed, with them seemingly only getting more popular every day. But with new eyes also come stereotypes, misconceptions, and ultimately misunderstandings. It's an inevitable cycle of human nature. We fear what we don't understand and label what we can't comprehend. So that is why in this video, I'll be covering some of the most common myths that I've heard about the Surron and sharing my opinion on whether they are true or not. So without taking up any more time, let's just jump right into the video. But first, what would you do if you got injured by a distracted driver on the way back from your favorite riding spot? You might think it's easier just to forget about it and suffer through the pain. But wait, if you're injured and you don't know where to start, with Morgan & Morgan, it's so easy. With Morgan & Morgan, you can submit a claim without ever having to leave the couch, because they have modernized the injury law process, so that in 8 clicks or less, you can submit a claim to Morgan & Morgan and have America's largest injury law firm fighting for you. So if you're ever injured in an accident, you can check out Morgan & Morgan using the link in the description or dial pound law, that is pound 529 from your cell phone. Thank you, Morgan & Morgan, for sponsoring this video. Up first is the myth that it is maintenance free. This is without a doubt the one I hear all the time. Compared to a motorcycle or especially a dirt bike, yeah, it's pretty much maintenance free. As in, you don't have to do oil changes, flush the fluids, or have to rebuild your motor ever. But that doesn't mean that you can just ride around forever and not worry about anything. Now, this is not a video about Surron maintenance, so I'm not going to cover everything in great detail, but basically it's the same maintenance that you would do on a mountain bike, except you have to do it more often. You should expect to replace brake pads about every month or two if you ride daily and aggressively, bleed and service your brakes about once a year, clean and lube your chain often, make sure your spokes are tightened and wheels are trued, and constantly be checking for loose screws and bolts, most importantly on your motor mounts, jack shaft, axles, and brake rotors. Those always come loose. But really anything will come loose over time, so check it and Loctite it to prevent it from coming loose in the future. The next myth is that Surrons are illegal. This is without a doubt the biggest myth about Surrons, and it is that they are illegal to ride on the streets and in many trail areas. Now, this is a complicated subject, and I'm not a lawyer, so do not take any legal advice from me. I'll just try to cover this in a general way without making this video extremely boring. Basically, it strongly depends on where you live, and it doesn't even come down to your state or country, it mostly comes down to your local jurisdiction, and ultimately if those laws, if any, are being enforced. Many people think that you can't ride on roads at all, but that is not entirely true. In some places you'll be considered a moped, and others you would simply need to make it street legal for that area and register it, which is what I have personally done to ride on streets completely worry-free. I'll bust another 2 myths within this one because I see it all the time on r/Surron, but putting pedals on it and calling it pedal assisted will not make it street legal, simply because you're pushing way over 750 watts. It just makes your bike handle worse, and it makes you look like a goofy, so just don't.
If you're doing it, stop it. Get some help.
Additionally, getting a BAC 4000 and calling it street legal because you can turn the power down to 750 watts does not make it street legal. We all know you are not riding with that low of a power setting on the streets, maybe the sidewalks, but at that point you would literally be faster on a normal bicycle. Ultimately, as long as you're not impeding with traffic or obviously breaking any laws, the police probably will not bother you. For trail areas, it once again depends on your location, but what you will find is lots of places don't have any laws in place, which makes it up to the rider's best judgment. Obviously, taking it on some hiking trails is a bad idea, or put simply, any area that has lots of people walking around it. My favorite places to ride completely carefree are empty lots, power line trails on government property, and old abandoned bike trails. How do I know it's old and abandoned? Well, I could hardly find it the first time I did, and if I don't go there for a few weeks, it gets extremely overgrown. I'm pretty sure some homeless people go through them sometimes because I accidentally found their camp, but I've never seen anyone else while riding on these trails. Places like this are a perfect area to bring out some shovels and build your own jumps and trek. Basically, use your own best judgment when exploring, and in new areas, ride at a walking speed just in case you need to stop suddenly. Gear is just a suggestion. A lot of people think that because it's not a real bike, that means you don't need to wear real gear.
Yeah, I think it's time for a full face now.
Well, this is simply not true. While it doesn't have the same weight as a motorcycle, oftentimes you are going the same speed with the same obstacles and the same risks. If you hit a tree or a car, it'll feel about the same regardless if you're riding a Surron or a motorcycle, with the single exception that your motorcycle would do more damage to you if it falls on you than your Surron would. So that is why I strongly recommend wearing gear when you ride. Gloves and a full face are the bare minimum. Obviously wearing leathers is overkill, but some Kevlar riding pants and some padding can really go a long way. Additionally, if you ride off-road, then some moto boots will not only save your ankles, but also your toes from getting crushed by logs and rocks. Everything else I think is a bit more optional. It just depends on how comfortable you want to be and your personal risk tolerance. I personally like to have knee pads and a chest and back protector when I'm doing any type of hard riding. You cannot ride in wet conditions. This is a bit less common from the Surron crowd and a lot more common in people that don't know anything about the Surron. I have had several people ask me what I do when it rains for half the year in my area. To their surprise, I say that I ride in the rain. Yeah, it's not the most fun thing to do, and I try to avoid it to ride in between the breaks and the weather, but the Surron has no issue dealing with water. A lot of people seem to think that the motor will break if you get it wet, but that is actually not true. Electric brushless motors, like the one on the Surron, can run just fine underwater. The controller is just what needs to be waterproof. And for the most part, the whole bike is waterproof, especially when it's stock. It's only once you start upgrading that you typically lose those waterproof abilities with your controller and battery, but that is only if you fully submerge the bike. A bit of rain and some puddles won't hurt anything, and obviously this is a whole different story with salt water. I wouldn't bring a bike anywhere near that stuff. The next most common misconception about Surrons is that it is a motorcycle or a dirt bike, or can at least replace them. Well, sure, it might look like one, and some people try to make them into one, and some of them even succeed at doing that. At the end of the day, the Surron will never really be equivalent to a motorcycle or a dirt bike. The biggest difference that you cannot do anything about is range. Gas-powered vehicles will always have more range than electric when pushing the same amount of power. Or you could take a dirt bike off-road enduro racing for over 100 miles no problem. The Surron could easily make it everywhere the dirt bikes can, but it'll completely run out of battery before mile 30, where it'll need a charge for 3 hours. You could always run a bigger battery, but there comes a point of diminishing returns, mostly with your own comfort. And obviously, it's not even comparable to any road bike when it comes to range. Then there is weight. The stock Surron is only 110 pounds, which is less than half the weight of almost any other dirt bike, let alone street bikes. Now this is mostly for the positive because everyone wants their bike to weigh less. This makes the Surron easier to ride through very technical sections and just things that dirt bikes would have a hard time with. Granted, the skill of the rider has a lot to do with this, but ultimately, you need less skill to get further on a Surron than you do on a dirt bike. Additionally, if you drop your bike or you get to a section that you just can't ride over, you can easily pick up your bike and just walk over it. The only slight drawback to this is that the Surron gets knocked around more, but this can easily be counteracted with better suspension and bigger wheels. And ultimately, the biggest difference is just the skill that it takes to ride. Not having a clutch, not having to shift gears, and not using a foot brake are massive things that you don't need to worry about on a Surron. Some of this is for the better, and some of it isn't. I can definitely say that I wish the Surron had gears that I could shift, but at the same time, not having a clutch to deal with makes it incredibly easy to ride on difficult terrain. Not having a foot brake is also a huge benefit, mostly because you get a lot more precise control with your fingers than you do with your feet, and you are never in a situation where you cannot reach your rear brake, unless you're doing one-handers. Overall, the Surron is a lot easier to ride and faster to learn on. I think it's a great first bike for someone looking to get into motorcycles, and even more so a great addition if you already have a motorcycle, but unless you do strictly urban riding, it will never replace a motorcycle. It's cheaper than a motorcycle. On the subject of motorcycles, many people seem to think that the Surron is cheaper than a regular motorcycle. While this can be true in some situations, it usually isn't really the case. Yeah, you don't need to do oil changes, rebuilds, or pay for gas, but trust me, the costs can easily add up to be more than you would expect. And most of this comes down to mods, replacing broken stuff, and maintenance. Now don't get me wrong, you can spend a disgusting amount of money on anything that you put your mind to, but really I'm just talking about what you're getting for your money. Stock the Surron is about $4,500. Just with that money alone, you could easily get a very nice used motorcycle. Add the typical small mods, 72-volt battery, BAC 4000, new suspension, new wheels, and you're easily looking at a bike that's over $12,000. I mean, I know some people that have spent up to $25,000 on their Surron. That is the price of a brand new 2020 Camry on, in all reality, a fun toy. The Surron can stay relatively cheap until you start pushing more power and you need to start replacing more things. You'll run through brakes quicker, start snapping belts, and for me, even chains once I got converted to chain drive. You also might get issues with bearings and stock suspension. The list can kind of build up. And don't get me wrong, I love my heavily modded Surron and it's 100% worth it to me, and you cannot beat it for urban riding. But in a more country area where space and noise is not an issue, you would probably be better off with a regular dirt bike. As for now, that is all I have on the biggest myths out there about the Surron. Let me know if you think I missed any, and if I didn't, leave a suggestion for a Surron video that you would like to see me make in the future. As for now, that is all I have. Thank you all for watching, and I'll see you guys in the next video.